All right, guys, in this video, we're talking about lung compliance and surfactant. So the general idea is we need lungs to be compliant, which really just means they need to be able to stretch. Compliance is just the ability for something to stretch and inflate like a balloon. Some balloons are easy to blow up. Others are thicker and it takes more pressure. We want our lungs to easily stretch and then snap back. All right, and the thing that we're fighting is something called surface tension. Right? Water has surface tension. Remember from an intro class at some point, water molecules are polar. They form hydrogen bonds. Those hydrogen bonds link water molecules together and create surface tension, which is how this, almost magical spider can walk on water. Notice the little dimples. That's the weight of the spider pushing down, and it's not quite heavy enough to break the surface tension. Now, if you were a particularly mean little child, you could have found a water spider and dropped a little bit of soap in the water. And as those soap molecules spread further and further away, as soon as they hit where the foot was, that spider would immediately go plunk right down through and sink because soap breaks surface tension, right? The soap molecules get in between the hydrogen bonds on waters, and that decreases tension, right? Our equation for pressure is 2T over R, right? And that equation translates to pressure is equal to 2 times the tension, meaning the surface tension caused by polarity in water, divided by R. R, in this case, is radius. Okay, so what this effectively means is if you imagine that this is lung, and these are two different alveolar sacs, right, connected to a bronchiole, right? So this is a bronchiole. We'll call this alveolus number 1. We'll call this alveolus number 2. Right? If we want to know what the pressure is in these two alveoli, we have to care about surface tension and we have to care about radius, right? For the radius side of things, think about it like this. If this is the radius of your alveolus. If somebody was to come in and squeeze on this thing, like imagine a hand just coming in here and squeezing on alveolus number 1, its radius is going to go down, kind of like the ventricle and the heart contracting, squeezing on blood. This happens all the time. If you bend, twist your torso, your lungs are getting squished inside your thoracic cavity, right? If you bend over to your right, the right side of your right lung is getting compressed, whereas the left side of your left lung is getting stretched. And so your lungs get smushed and smashed all over the place and radius can change, right? If you didn't have surfactant, what would happen was if you squeezed on that lung, its radius would go down. That would give you an increase in pressure. And if you have an increase in pressure over here because the radius went down, air moves from high to low, right? The risk is if you push air into the other alveolus, this guy, alveolus number 1, is going to start losing volume, and alveolus number 2 is going to start gaining volume, and you risk having alveolus number 1 collapse. Right? So the whole purpose of surfactant is we have these different type of pneumocytes, which just means lung cells. The type 1 pneumocytes are the ones that are making up the alveolar membrane. That's where gas exchange happens, those very thin, simple squamous epithelia. Type 2 pneumocytes are these thicker cuboidal cells that are secreting surfactant. And the key part here is they're secreting surfactant all the time. They don't just start secreting surfactant when it's needed because you always need it. And that surfactant, we want to coat the surface of these alveoli. Right? Now, the question is, all right, so when the radius goes down, we need our surfactant to lower pressure, and the way you lower pressure is by lowering tension, right? If you want your pressure to go down, right, because remember, we had our radius go down, that makes pressure go up. So we also need to decrease tension to make it match. The way that tension goes down is when the alveolus shrinks, it starts to get smaller, these surfactant molecules become closer together. Right? Kind of like if you inflate a balloon, like a kid's party balloon, and you write on it with a Sharpie, if you blow it up, the letters get bigger, but the ink gets spread out, so it's not as black, it's not as dark. Whereas if you let air out of the balloon and it gets smaller, the letters get smaller, but the ink will get darker and more dense. It's the exact same idea. So anytime an alveolus starts to shrink a little bit, the surfactant becomes more concentrated, which makes it work better, right? And when it works better, it decreases tension. And when it decreases tension, you decrease pressure, right? And so the whole purpose of surfactant is to make so if an alveolus starts getting smaller and squeezed on and pressurized, the surfactant gets more concentrated, lowers your tension, lowers your pressure, and makes sure that this alveolus doesn't actually collapse, right? Which is the ultimate goal. Okay, so people that lose their surfactant, either because their lungs aren't producing enough or because maybe they have water in their lungs that's diluting out the surfactant, that dramatically increases their risk of lung collapse because their compliance will go down, makes it difficult for the lungs to stretch. That makes it harder to inhale, so they can't fill their lungs with as full of a volume, and they're not getting as much oxygen. Okay, that covers surfactant. It's kind of its own standalone topic, but we've got more coming on respiratory, so follow along in the playlist to get the big picture.